touch all the notes, if that makes sense. And when he wrote this book and set it up, he decided that he was going to commit himself to covering all those bases. And when you read, if you look, just skim through the table of contents of These Are Grass, you'll see how much he covers. It is a single work in itself. He only wrote one book, in effect. That was this one, which he added to and changed as he grew and adapted to the experiences of life. If you read this book before the Civil War, you'll find that his attitude towards America and towards poetry is a very jingoistic attitude, chauvinistic. If you read it after the Civil War, you'll realize the effect of death, of disaster. You don't get any beat drums business left. But beat drums is still in the book. In other words, the book is supposed to cover both, let's get out there and kill those Rebs, and also, my God, what a horror this experience is. Right? What does this war do? He tried to make the book cover human experience in all ways. I told you last week, he claimed to have 6 illegitimate children in Louisiana. All the scholars of Whitman since that time have been down there in Bayou country trying to find his descendants. But he didn't have 6 illegitimate children any place. But what he's doing is saying something, which is part of the role, right? Is that I am a man who can hardly restrain his masculinity in all ways, right? When I get a woman, I put my arms around her. But he was totally unlike that. He was a very shy man in many ways, especially with women he was shy. But also with men. He was a very personal and private man. But the role was, all right, here I am. So he put on that role of Walt Whitman when he was 38 years old. He says, okay, I'm going to be this person. And he played the role till he died. The consequence of it, I think, is exactly what you're saying. That you read certain poems and you say, this poem is not touching. It just is not working. And so many of the poems in here have that fake quality to them. Well, I tend as a reader to say, all right, I'm not going to read those poems. But I know why they're here. And it's not that he wants to be phony, but it's that he wants to be universal. It's the meaning. Right? And he just couldn't hold it up. Who could, right? Poem after poem after poem, experience after experience. The odds are very good that he never had a male-female relationship in his life. But he couldn't ignore that because that's so important to his image of what it is to be human, to be adult, to be alive. And so he wrote poems, some of which work and some of which don't. It takes us right back to Emily Dickinson, I think, that one of her great achievements is the ability to take you so far beyond Amherst, Massachusetts, that it doesn't make any difference if she never got married. It's an irrelevant question if she ever had a lover. She knows, insofar as she can, what passion is, what love is, and the truth of the poem is in the working of the poem. And sometimes it doesn't work for her, and sometimes it doesn't work for him. If that makes sense what I'm saying. Sometimes when he's speaking what he does experience, it doesn't work too. But the straining effect of phoniness is something that he has committed himself to, I think, and cannot avoid. It's worse for him because he says, take this as it is. Right? This is my work. But Dickinson didn't do that, right? You can pick and choose and ignore the bad poems, whatever they come from, and when you're done, you've got the poems that are effective. You don't have that. You don't have the sense of an interlock. What's the word? Oeuvre, right? Where everything is just like this. And the fact is, as miserable as it is, to understand Whitman thoroughly, you have to read this blasted book from beginning to end. And it's a terrible task, because I did it once in 3 days, and I hardly have survived the experience. So I have to agree and then say, set back a bit and see where it comes from. Because a lot of the really lousy poems here are consequences of, if that makes sense what I'm saying. So today what I want to do is go with a poem that works. We have 2 absolutely major experiences in Whitman that we should come to terms with. And I'm afraid I'll scare you away today because long poems are hard to come to terms with. But if you'll bear with me, we might come out all right in the end. The first poem I want to look at is the most important elegy America has ever produced. Really prime emotional experience and a very serious and sober coming to terms with death. And that's the great poem, When Lilacs Last and the Dooryard Bloomed. I'm going to start with it by reading the last poem in this section, Memories of President Lincoln, which is only 4 lines long. This dust was once the man. Right? I'm not going to read Captain, Oh Captain. You all read that in 4th grade, and that's enough for any person. The last page, just before By Blue Ontario's Shore. This dust was once the man, gentle, plain, just, and resolute, under whose cautious hand against the foulest crime in history, known in any land or age, was saved the union of these states. That's not much of a poem, though it has a wonderful opening line, I think. The last one, In Memories of President Lincoln. You can see that section. You find it there? You missing it?
285.
285. Okay. It should be just before By Blue Ontario Shore. We've got a good okay. Okay. You find it? Memories of President Lincoln is a section of 4 or 5 poems.
Is it, how does it start?
This dust was once the man. It's only 4 lines, so we can probably live without it. Okay. What I want you to notice about that is the prosaic quality. It's very exciting. The first line is not much. But you can feel something in those 4 lines, I think, that should impress you before you read Lilacs. And that is that Lincoln meant a great deal to Whitman. Whitman was more a Democrat, not in the political sense, but in the very deep sense of that word, than he was anything else, even in terms of religion in some ways. He believed in this country. He believed in the Union. He believed in the states. And Lincoln was, for him, a man almost beyond praise. He saw him a couple of times and wrote about it. It was simply overwhelming to him. Because Lincoln's intention not to allow this Union to split up in war was for him, probably the greatest cause in the history of mankind. Whitman felt there was no country like America. No country for possibility, for diversity, for energy, for possibility, potential, you name it. And Lincoln was a saint. I think the reason this poem, Lilacs, works so well is that it actually does reflect the incredible personal grief that he felt with Lincoln's assassination. This is a poem about the loss of a saint in some ways. Put it more strongly than that. It's a poem about what happens when you lose one of the most important people to you and how you handle grief. Turn over to it, to the beginning. The first thing you hear is the intensity of grief. And all of us feel this. We don't think about it in political terms very often. I was watching Eleanor and Franklin the last 2 nights on TV, if you ever saw that. And did you see it? It was on Channel 12 the last 2 nights. And watching the people on the railway siding as Franklin Roosevelt's train went up and the tears flowing out. The intensity of it, I think it's happened to us in our lifetime only 3 times probably. It could happen only twice, only with Roosevelt and with Kennedy perhaps for some. And I suspect that only Roosevelt is comparable, that the shock of Kennedy's death is not similar at all to what Lincoln meant to the people, or what Roosevelt meant to the people, given his tenure and what the 2 of them did, which was bring us through a tremendous war. I've had students come up, however, after reading this poem and say that it has helped them immensely in facing grief of their own, because the poem is both about the loss of an individual man and how to come to terms with grief and with death. It's a lesson in it, in a sense. So if you read the poem right, it comes around. The second point, this poem has a history which goes back hundreds of years in English poetry. It's a pastoral elegy, revitalized for the 19th century and for us. But its ancestors include, and cousins include, such poems as Adonais by Shelley, which is on the death of Keats, Thyrsis by Matthew Arnold. It goes back to one of the greatest of all poems in British literature, which is, anybody know? No, it's not an elegy of that type. I'm talking about John Milton's Lycidas, yes, which is marvelous. Now the point about that, which you don't have to take too intensely, is that when you write in a tradition, you're given the power of the history. There are certain things you must do, for example, when you write a pastoral elegy. One of those traditionally has been that you make the person who died a shepherd who has died. That's the pastoral element. Now Whitman threw that out. We're not talking about shepherds. But among the others is a certain sequence of expressions of grief. First, the immense, unbearable quality of the grief, then the gradually coming to terms with it, and then the belief that the grief, what the lost one is someplace else up in the sky, usually in heaven. Another is that you bring flowers to the grave. You must bring flowers. And for Whitman, obviously, the flower that's brought is the lilac. When lilacs last in the dooryard bloomed, and the great star early drooped in the western sky in the night, I mourned and yet shall mourn with ever-returning spring. Ever-returning spring, Trinity sure to me you bring, lilac blooming perennial, and drooping star in the west, and thought of you, my love. And we have to work through this. All of us have lost people we love, and the working through grief is one of the great tasks of life. From the very first stanza, you get the solemnness of this poem. I tend not to want to overburden this class with solemn poetry, but there is a time for it, and maybe now's the time of Whitman. You see some words that remind you of power. One of them is Trinity. Trinity is a religious term. It has to do with the Holy Ghost and the Father and the Son, as you know. It's a different kind of Trinity that he's working with here, though. It is memory and grief and thought that's put on him. One of the reasons this is so powerful is that people who lived in his day knew well what he meant. Lincoln died on April 15th, as I believe, as I recall. And when he died, the lilacs in Washington, D.C. were in full bloom. So what he's saying is something that all of us experience in real life. It's not just a poetic symbol, though it becomes a symbol of memory. He's saying every April, when I smell lilacs, I think of Lincoln. And you know how odors will do this to you, right? As you attach yourself to a one experience and you cannot get out. And he's saying, how can I get out of the grief? And all the time I see this fact. It's not only the smell. What you're reminded of is the repeated phrase in the two stanzas, the end of the first and the beginning of the second, right? I mourn and yet shall mourn, ever-returning spring, ever-returning spring. That repetition is the point. It's one of the great paradoxes of life, that nature, which is our model, is also a great liar to us, because nature tells us something that we know is not true. Nature says there's always a spring after winter, right? If winter comes, can spring be far behind? If you remember Shelley. But Eliot had it truer, didn't he? April is the cruelest month, because it reminds you that trees renew their blossoms, and I get 1 year older. Nothing is going to bring back youth and vitality once you've passed it. And the great task of us as humans is to accept the fact that nature is cyclical, but I am not. Every year I get older, closer to death. And every year those lilac blooms come out just as young as ever. It's a disgusting truth when you think about it. So he's right away, you see, intrinsic in the experience is that I don't want to be reminded of flowers and youth and new spring and new growth, which we're having right now, right, in Seattle, because Lincoln is gone forever. That's the pain. He's gone forever. The second stanza is the one which doesn't work at all. I hate this stanza, but you can't avoid it. And you can see how bad it is, because it's his attempt to show you just the emotional scream, right? It's the primal scream of grief. Anytime you start out, oh, it simply doesn't work as a reading experience. Oh, powerful western fallen star, oh, shades of night, oh, moody, tearful night, oh, great star disappeared, oh, the black murk that hides the star, oh, cruel hands that hold me powerless, oh, helpless soul of me, oh, harsh surrounding cloud that will not free my soul. I can't read it. I always want to satirize it, and make it a joke. And it's not a joke. It just doesn't work, that's all. Here we are, phony. I would rather have him just say, in a note on the side, the way Coleridge did, at this point the poet descends into uncontrollable grief. And have it given to me indirectly, then. But you see what he's trying to do. When you know this yourself, when that person dies you love, there isn't a word for it. It's just pain. That's all it is. It's just pain. And this poem is that sense of I will never be free. The line is harsh surrounding cloud. The cloud in the poem is a symbol of grief, which is covered in, you can see nothing. It's gone. But he's very quickly back on track as a poet, and the rest of the poem works well. Notice how cool third stanza is compared to the second, and how wonderful Whitman picks up that distance of imagery and makes it work. In the dooryard, fronting an old farmhouse, near the whitewashed paling stands the lilac bush, tall growing with heart-shaped leaves of rich green, with many a pointed blossom rising delicate, and with the perfume strong I love. With every leaf a miracle, and from this bush in the garden with delicate colored blossoms and heart-shaped leaves of rich green, a sprig with a flower I break. If you're watching syntax, you notice he does something he's very good at this, holding off the verb, the action word until the last word, or the power word until the last. In other words, all the way up to the end of this stanza, you see, you focus on lilac, how it smells. Now, lilac is a special flower, if you stop and think about it, which most people do not. It is one of the few flowers that cannot repopulate itself through seed. Lilacs spread. They don't seed themselves. And you get a lilac by taking a sprig and planting it. If you cross the United States on the prairies, through Kansas, Nebraska, the Dakotas, Minnesota, you will frequently see, as you drive across the country, single lilac bushes in the midst of a field, usually up next to a fence. What that means in American history is that at one point in our history of expansion, there was a house there. Some woman had brought her lilac and planted it. The lilac is the housewife's flower. She brings it with her. She puts it next to her doorstep so she can remember the smell and the transition of flowers every year. In other words, it's one of the most personal of all bushes. Old. Everybody has. I bet you that 80% of you have a grandmother or had a grandmother who had a lilac bush. Right? I mean, that's part of America.
We have a bush from my husband's great-grandmother from California.
See, I told you.
We joke that that's the family heirloom.
It goes with you. And the second point is that in addition to that, if you're like me, the lilac is the flower you take to the cemetery. When I was a boy, all my years as a child, in Wisconsin, it's not April, it's May. Around Memorial Day, my grandmother would come up, and she would come to me the day before and say, Gary, will you take me up? Will you come with me to the cemetery? And we kind of put lilac bushes. She'd have old mason jars, and she'd make me climb up, because we had tall lilac bushes all across the backyard, and I had to get on top and clip the white ones and the purple ones. And all the time I did it, I thought, it's so dumb. The lilacs die in one day when you cut them off the bush. It's stupid to do this, but they're also natural bouquets, by the way. One lilac is a bouquet. And so we'd go up, and she'd put these on my grandpa's grave, and her mother and father's, and her brothers and sisters. And at the end of that would be the recognition of the memorial that lilacs meant. When lilacs were in bloom, it meant go to the cemetery and think about people you lost. For me, as a 10-year-old, it was just absurd. It was crazy. I didn't like doing it because I couldn't see any virtues of it. But I was not very smart when I was 10. And thinking back, I think from this poem, what it means, as you probably know, this is the flower that says spring and regrowth, and it means also think of what you've lost. So the image of lilac, the fact that Lincoln died on that day, is important. And the lilac is an important flower to us. It's the most homely of all flowers in the best meaning of the word homely. So, notice the way that stanza works. It brings you right up to the experience of taking lilac. I know something else about lilac, and I did it so many times. And that is, when you take a lilac, it's not like pulling a pansy or something. It is snap, right?
Yes.
It's the only flower that snaps when you, isn't it?
Yes.
All the others you cut or they sort of crumble, but a lilac is a very clean break. It's a tough wooded. Now, all right, I take this out. What am I going to do with it? You know, you will offer it as a gift. And it's also true that as Lincoln came across the country, all the way across Ohio, Pennsylvania to Illinois, people threw flowers as they actually would, and gave their sort of memorial to Lincoln. In the swamp, in secluded recesses, a shy and hidden bird is warbling a song. Solitary the thrush, the hermit withdrawn to himself, avoiding the settlements, sings by himself a song of the bleeding throat, death's outlet song of life. For well, dear brother, I know if thou wast not granted to sing, thou wouldst surely die. At this point in the poem, all he's doing is giving us that knowledge that the bird is out there. Right? You notice where he is? By himself, out in the swamp. The thrush in this poem is going to be the way you get out of grief. He's going to sing to you the truth about what death is in life. And that is ultimately going to be, of course, that death is hand in hand in life. Death is not the end. It's part and parcel of the ongoing action of being alive. At this point, all Whitman wants to do is to lay it in front of you as something you know is there. You can't handle it yet. You know as well as all of us know, I think, that there's nothing more frustrating when you're in deep grief than to have someone come up and say, it'll all work out fine and you'll feel better by next Monday. You know, you don't go away, I may feel better by next Monday, but don't tell me that now, because I'm not ready for that. So he's just reminding us that there's going to be something to listen to. Right? There's a time now for grief. But let's look at what's happening to Lincoln. As I read the next stanza, look for the prepositions and the words that move you, that are motion words, over, above, beyond, as he takes us through the stanza. Over the breast of the spring, the land, amid cities, amid lanes, and through old woods where lately the violets peeped from the ground, spotting the gray debris. Amid the grass in the fields, each side of the lanes, passing the endless grass, passing the yellow-speared wheat, every grain from its shroud in the dark brown fields uprisen, passing the apple tree, blows of white and pink in the orchards, carrying a corpse to where it shall rest in the grave, night and day, journeys a coffin. Powerful stanza again, as you can see. If you are interested in syntax, you boil that sentence down to its elements and you get three words. A coffin journeys. The whole sentence is a coffin journeys, or travels. Everything else is modifying it. But look what it's modifying. It's modifying such things as through old woods where violets peeped from the ground, spotting the gray debris. We're talking about that lie that nature gives us, right? That in winter it's gray and dead, but every spring those violets come forth. The next one, right? Passing the grass that's come up, passing the wheat, every grain from its shroud in the dark, right? That sense, out of death comes life, out of death comes life. Each image here is that growth of the spring as it reminds you of summer on the way. And then with that in your mind, the tremendous beauty of spring, he knocks you right down on the head, right? That coffin, nobody gets out of his coffin. You're right there as you pass. The imagery is all of nature going like this, right? Nature going up, coffin going like that. Coffin going horizontal. Coffin that passes through lanes and streets, through day and night, with great cloud darkening the land. What's he referring to here? You know? Grief, yes, all the grief. With the pomp of the in-looped flags, with the cities draped in black, with the show of the states themselves, as of crepe-veiled women standing, with processions long and winding and the flambeaux of the night, with the countless torches lit, with the silent sea of faces and the unbared heads, with the waiting depot, the arriving coffin, and the somber faces with dirges through the night, with the thousand voices rising strong and solemn, with all the mournful voices of the dirges poured around the coffin, the dim-lit churches and the shuddering organs, where amid these you journey, with the tolling bells' perpetual clang. Here, coffin that slowly passes, I give you my sprig of life. It's a lovely He could really, if only he wouldn't say things like flambeau, you know. It would be so nice. But he can't resist the temptation to use fake French words. All the same, it's a beautiful stanza. If you look at it a second time, you'll see an interesting psychological movement. Do you have a question?
No, I was just going to say there's something about it that gives you that feeling of, the distance or the broad in general.
It's that tremendous. This is the movie last night, because last night's second version shows the whole connective part of Eleanor and Franklin Part 2 is Eleanor sitting in the car while his coffin's being moved from Georgia to Washington, and every time she remembers something, they come back to the funeral car of Roosevelt, and you look out the window and you see these endless people standing in the silence, just the ordinary people of America, many in tears. It's very moving, but it's exactly what he's talking about. The universality, which is that endless cloud, and then the particular. How do you get down? And what's the value, after all, of one broken sprig of lilac when the whole world is grieving, you see? Right? I mean, every church bell in America is tolling the grief, trying to express sorrow. And at the end of all that, he says, here, this is what I can do. This sprig of lilac. It's nothing, obviously, isn't it? It's not worth the effort to reach out. And yet, you must do something. Many of us remember this when Kennedy died. The sense of, what do you do? I mean, you've got to do something. And I was in college at the time. And I remember they filled the chapel, because you have to get together at a time like that. And this is a Lutheran college. You don't pray for Catholic presidents at a Lutheran. Yes, you do. Right? But that sense of, what am I going to do? What am I going to do? I am nobody. Well, the thing to do is go about your life as usual. But you can't, obviously. And if it means this is how I go through the ritual of grief, this is how we do it. Not for you, for one alone, blossoms and branches green, to coffins all I bring. For fresh as the morning, thus would I chant a song for you, O sane and sacred death. All over bouquets of roses, O death, I cover you over with roses and early lilies, that mostly and now the lilac that blooms the first. Copious I break the sprigs from the bushes, with loaded arms I come, pouring for you, in the coffins of all of you, O death. You notice that the whole stanza is in parenthesis, and it has to be seen in parenthesis to be quite understood, that this is not so much the ongoing focus on Lincoln as his attempt as a poet to, now I don't know if that's phony or not, right? It's a more debatable stanza.
I didn't say all books.
No, I know. I know he's, but you still see what he's doing. He's saying, in a sense, to us as readers, I want you to see that this sprig of lilac is in fact armloads of lilacs for everyone who's died. Because Lincoln is just a symbol after all, isn't he? And the flowers are just symbols. And we have to come to terms with death, all of us, one by one, this flower by flower. I'm never sure when I teach this whether I wish he had not written that stanza, because I think it would work without it, if I'm making sense what I'm saying. But the point is still there. He had a temptation to say, look, and then to underline it 3 or 4 times and then say, I'll repeat it again for you in case you missed my point, And usually you don't miss his point. So, but you can see the point. It's not an unbeautiful stanza, so I let it stand.
You started to say about the one before, not that there was an interest in the psychological aspect.
Did I say that?
You didn't finish it yet, but I just wondered about that interesting psychological
Oh, it was for me the inclusion, the movement towards the minimal quality of the poet in the context of the nation's grief. His knowledge, as you read that stanza, that in the end he's just one person and all he's doing is something very simple. Even to use a word like sprig, you see, it's not even it's not copious armload. It's just one batch. A sprig is as cheap as you could get. Right? He's not using the floral service at all. And so here, in the context of all this tolling of bells and people grieving and tears pouring out, he says, when I come down to it, it's only me. And this. That's what I meant by that. So now he turns and speaks to Lincoln. Lincoln is the orb, another word I dislike intensely, but it's the star. Lincoln is the star that's setting, dying. O western orb, sailing the heaven, now I know what you must have meant. As a month since I walked in silence the transparent shadowy night, as I saw you had something to tell, as you bent to me night after night, as you drooped in the sky low down, as if to my side, while the other stars all looked on, as we wandered through the solemn night. For something I know not what kept me from sleep. As the night advanced, and I saw on the rim of the west how full you were of woe, as I stood on the rising ground in the breeze in the cool, transparent night, as I watched where you passed and was lost in the netherward black of the night, as my soul in its trouble dissatisfied sank, as where you sat o'er, concluded, dropped in the night, and was gone. Every time I read that stanza, I'm reminded of Lincoln's dream, which you probably have read about, that he dreamt shortly before he died, I think 2 days before he died, that he had entered the east room of the White House and found it was draped in black, and he walked up to a man who was standing at the end of a coffin and said, "What's going on?" And the man said, "Haven't you heard the president is dead?" It's a true dream. It's well documented. So Lincoln had a very clear dream premonition of his own death, because that's what happened. And what this stanza is doing is saying that I'm finally coming to understand. The surface of the poem is very clear. He went out for a walk in the night and saw a western orb. Let's assume it's Venus or Mars or some moving planet in the sky. That looked sad, and he was getting emanations of it, but he didn't understand. We don't understand these things, obviously, until it's too late. It's the human state as well. But it has to do with the motion of greatness into, what do we want to call it, infinity. And Lincoln is going to become symbolized by that star. He stops for a second. Sing on there in the swamp. O singer bashful and tender, I hear your notes, I hear your call. I come presently, I understand you. But a moment I linger, for the lustrous star has detained me. The star my departing comrade holds and detains me. A very simple stanza, but important, right? It reminds you that he knows he will come out of this, as all sane people know. It's the way you keep your sanity in grief. But he also knows that he does not choose yet. The star is Lincoln, the cloud is the grief. But the bird is still in the background, and it will work nicely as you read the poem on. The question is, what do I, as a singer, say? What do I say? And the next sections ask that question. How do you properly do it? Oh, how shall I warble myself for the dead one there I loved? And how shall I deck my song for the large, sweet soul that is gone? And what shall my perfume be for the grave of him I love? Sea winds blown from east and west, blown from the eastern sea and blown from the western sea, till there on the prairies meeting, these and with these in the breath of my chant, I'll perfume the grave of him I love. Now watch his democratic purpose here. Lincoln comes from Illinois, the very heart of America, and he's going to try to find a way to make Lincoln symbolic. And he has the sea winds blowing and carrying all the odors of this country to meet in Illinois to create this great man, this great president. I'm going to try to create that sense of encompassing quality that Lincoln was in politics and government, in which he wants to be as a singer, the poet. I like this next one, stanza, very much. Oh, what shall I hang on the chamber walls? What shall be the pictures that I hang on the walls to adorn the burial house of him that I love? See, what is the proper homage to Lincoln? Pictures of growing spring and farms and homes, with the 4th month eve at sundown and the gray smoke lucid and bright, with floods of the yellow gold of the gorgeous, indolent sinking sun burning, expanding the air, with the fresh, sweet herbage under the foot, and the pale green leaves of the trees prolific. In the distance, the flowing glades, the breast of the river with a wind apple here and there, with ranging hills on the banks, with many a line against the sky and shadows, and the city at hand with dwellings so dense and stacks of chimneys, and all the scenes of life and the workshops and the workmen homeward returning. What's he saying? America, right? But it's every time I read that, I think of, oh, beautiful for spacious skies, grand waves of grain, because the stanza so reminds me of that sense of the beauty and glory. This is Lincoln's memory for us, right? That he kept this nation and its beauty and its opportunity for us. And he's going to go on. Lo, body and soul, this land, my own Manhattan, with spires and the sparkling and hurrying tides and the ships, the varied and ample land, the south and the north and the light. You notice he says south too. Keeps catches it. Ohio's shores and flashing Missouri, and ever the far-spreading prairies covered with grass and corn. Lo, the most excellent sun, so calm and and haughty. The violet and purple morn, with just felt breezes, the gentle, soft, measureless light, the miracle spreading, bathing all, the fulfilled noon, the coming eve delicious, the welcome night and the stars, over my cities shining all, enveloping man and land. He's trying to find something very difficult, I think. That is a particular image that will bring it all together. And ultimately, as you see it, once he gives us the individual images, cities, fields, mountains, rivers, right, forests, he does it with the sun. He loves the sun. Give me the splendid silent sun with all his beams full dazzling, he says in one other poem, which is one of my favorite opening lines of his. But what the sun does, you see, is in fact encompass it all. The heat, the warmth, it's what all America feels at the same time. Whitman likes noon. He likes the intensity. Right now, the sun is wonderful outside. You can feel that. That's what I want. Over my cities all, enveloping man and land. The birds back there again. Sing on, you gray-brown birds. Sing from the swamps, the recesses. Pour your chant from the bushes, limitless out of the dusk, out of the cedars and pines. Sing on, dearest brother, warble your reedy song, loud human song, with voice of uttermost woe. O liquid and free and tender, O wild and loose to my soul, O wondrous singer. You only I hear, if the star holds me, but will soon depart, if the lilac with mastering odor holds me. There's a star, the lilac, and now the song. If you're watching close, you'll see that he talks of the bird in a slightly more intimate fashion than before, isn't it? Before he said, stay away, I don't want to hear from you, I'm too deeply embedded in grief. And now he says, I hear you. I hear you. I'm listening. But I'm not quite yet ready. Now while I sat in the day and looked forth, in the close of the day, with its light and the fields of spring and the farmers preparing their crops, and the large unconscious scenery of my land with its lakes and forests, in the heavenly aerial beauty, after the perturbed winds and storms, under the arching heavens of afternoon's swift passing, and the voices of children and women, the many moving sea tides, and I saw the ships how they sailed, and the summer approaching with richness, and the fields all busy with labor, and the infinite separate houses, how they all went on, each with its meals and minutiae of daily usages, and streets, how their throbbings throbbed, and cities pent. Lo, then and there, falling upon them all, and among them all, enveloping me with the rest, appeared the cloud, appeared the long black trail, a new death, its thought, sacred knowledge of death, coming now to terms. And this is the way it is. It comes to you in the most active times of life, doesn't it? You don't expect it, it's not going to happen. And all of a sudden, as you're most aware of and enmeshed in the simple growth and change and vitality, doing things, down it comes. Like a deep black cloud, it covers your life and your awareness. And the time has come, you're being told to understand what death means. And this becomes really beautiful, I think, here towards the end. Then, with the knowledge of death as walking one side of me, and the thought of death close walking the other side, and I in the middle as with companions, and as holding the hands of companions, I fled forth to the hiding, receiving night that talks not, down to the shores of the water, the path by the swamp in the dimness, to the solemn, shadowy cedars and ghostly pines so still. I very much like the strange imagery of that stanza. How do you do when he says with the knowledge on one side and the thought of it? But it's not frightening. It's not like Death to the Grim Reaper at all. See, it's like companions, he says. I go down to listen to what this means because it's something we must encounter and come to terms with. And the singer, so shy to the rest, receive me. Why is the singer shy to the rest? That thrush. Why? Pardon?
It's not heard by now.
Why not? Other people do not hear him. You're right. You have to go to him carefully. All right, yes. You can't just say, "Hey, I'm ready. Tell me about that." Right? This happens. Many of you have been teachers. You know how hard it is to teach something that the kids have no experiencing at all. All right, and this happens with death homes a lot because in high school and in college, it's not uncommon to have large numbers of kids who have never experienced a close loss. It's a grandmother who lived in Newark, New Jersey, or something that died in their family, and to say to them, "Listen, you will want to understand what this is, because you will lose some." They say, I know, I'm 18 years old, nothing's ever going to touch me. I say, yeah. But Whitman's point is, the time will come when you're ready to listen. The gray-brown bird I know received us comrades three, and he sang the carol of death and a verse for him I love. From deep secluded recesses, from fragrant cedars and ghostly pines so still came the carol of the bird. Something else you'll notice is that he keeps reminding you of your various senses. He's a very sensuous poet, and he's shifting away from the lilac scent to the scent of cedars. There's the darker smell of forests and woods. Cedars are a natural product. They're a woods product, whereas flowers are human and personal and oriented to door sills and things like that. Now we're out in the Olympic Peninsula someplace, and we're feeling something much broader in its meaning. And the charm of the carol wrapped me as I held, as if by hands, my comrades in the night, and the voice of my spirit tallied the song of the bird. Now in italics here, you'll see the bird's song. I couldn't think of the word. And it's a beautiful lyric. Come, lovely and soothing death, undulate round the world, serenely arriving, in the day, in the night, to all, to each, sooner or later, delicate death. Praise be the fathomless universe, for life and joy, and for objects and knowledge curious, and for love, sweet love, but praise, 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 for the sure and winding arms of cool and folding death. Dark mother always gliding near with soft feet, have none chanted for thee a chant of fullest welcome? Then I chant it for thee. I glorify thee above all. I bring thee a song that when thou must indeed come unfalteringly. Approach, strong deliver us. When it is so, when thou hast taken them, I joyously sing the dead, lost in the loving floating ocean of thee, laved in the flood of thy bliss, O death. From me to thee glad serenades, dances for thee I propose, saluting thee, adornments and feastings for thee, and the sights of the open landscape and the high spread sky are fitting, and life in the fields and the huge and thoughtful night. The night in silence under many a star, the ocean shore and the husky whispering wave whose voice I know, and the soul turning to thee, O vast and well-veiled death, and the body gratefully nestling close to thee. Over the treetops I float thee a song, over the rising and sinking waves, over the myriad fields and the prairies wide, over the dense packed cities, all to the teeming wharves and waves.
Like to feed that into you. Anything else you're interested, let me know.
Okay. Emerson, by the way, is a double-barreled author. You get poetry and prose at the same time. He's one of the most important. To argue the case, I think you have gone long enough without doing Emerson. Emerson is the one of all American writers. He is the most indispensable thinker we have ever produced.
Everyday life.
Everywhere. Oh no, everybody goes back to Emerson.
Everybody.
Yeah, he influenced every writer after his time, and even now people still react to it. Even major writers you could lose without losing the fabric of American literature. Even if Melville died and never produced a book, you still would have that fabric. But without Emerson, you would not have American literature. But he's not easy.
Not easy.
His essays are, but wonderful too. Yeah. Also, a lot easier than you think.
Yes,
Something else.
it does take thinking.
A little bit, yeah. Let's read these last two sections, and then you can honestly say that you have read When Lilacs Last and the Dooryard Bloomed. This is the bringing out of the state that he had come to. To the tally of my soul, loud and strong, kept up the gray-brown bird, with pure, deliberate notes spreading, filling the night. Loud in the pines and cedars dim, clear in the freshness moist and the swamp perfume, and I with my comrades there in the night. Now, I'll ask you to think about one different way of seeing what you're reading there. Students tend to find that this is repetitious, and needlessly repetitious often. I would ask you to read this kind of repetition almost as though you were in church and you were listening to a Gregorian choir. That is, there are certain tones that are to be rung. And Whitman is one who believes in that very intensely, that you get that the value of repetition is not just to repeat the word, but to establish and maintain a certain mood. And he does it very consciously. If you're reading it right, it isn't just repetition, it's almost a church-like experience as he's bringing that around to you. While my sight was bound and my eyes unclosed as to long panoramas of visions, and I saw askant the armies. I saw as in noiseless dreams hundreds of battle flags, borne through the smoke of the battles and pierced with missiles. I saw them, and carried hither and yon through the smoke, and torn and bloody, and at last but a few shreds left on the staffs, and all in silence, and the staffs all splintered and broken. I saw battle corpses, myriads of them, and the white skeletons of young men. I saw them. I saw the debris of all the slain soldiers of the war, but I saw they were not as was thought. They themselves were fully at rest. They suffered not. They remained, the living remained and suffered. The mother suffered, and the wife and the child, and the musing comrade suffered. And the army suffered. And very, very true. It's clear what he's doing, I think, from one reading. That he's reminding us that he's not writing only about Lincoln. He's writing for everybody alive in 1865 who lost a son or a father or a brother because of the grief that was spread over the land, throughout the land. Lincoln is just a means.
Does he mean that it says, when March Lilacs was down, that first he only was personalizing the movement?
Yeah. That is,
At
it's
that
a
point,
vision.
it's all-
It's an interior vision that he gets. Yeah. As he goes out there, unable to see the facts, the truth, right? He hears through his ears the truth. He's able to see clearly. Because it's not the eyes that will do it for him. It's the interior. It comes through this organ, not this organ. It's a very awkward line, and I'm answering you very insecurely because I don't know exactly what it means. While my sight that was bound and my eyes unclosed, as to long panoramas of visions. I think what he's saying is that the sight which was originally bound, right, is unclosed in visions. Does that make sense? That's the closest I can come to it. That's one of about a large number of Whitman lines that I mull over and mull over and mull over, and I'm really not quite clear. Yeah, Whitman does that to us occasionally. I remember There's one line in Song of Myself in my favorite section, which I read and read. I taught it for 15 years, and I must have taught the poem heaven knows how many times. And finally it came like a flash of vision. And it was such an explicitly erotic image that I couldn't tell my kids. But I didn't know it for all those years. So I'll pass over this one next week when we get to it. But it's a marvelous image, right? That is, this bird is to speak to all of us who've lost. And of course, in his context, it's the war. All the dead. It's not the dead. It's not the dead. It's us. It's us. We have to live through the grief of suffering. And now he's moving out. The last line is to bring it out into normal, sort of a normal emotional state. Passing the visions, passing the night, unloosing the hold of my comrade's hands, passing the song of the hermit bird and the tallying song of my soul, victorious song, death's outlet song, yet varying, ever-altering song, as low and wailing, yet clear the notes rising and falling, flooding the night, sadly sinking and fainting, as warning and warning, and yet again bursting with joy, covering the earth and filling the spread of the heaven, as that powerful psalm in the night I heard from recesses, passing, I leave thee, lilac, with heart-shaped leaves, I leave thee there in the dooryard, blooming, returning with spring. I cease from my song for thee, from my gaze on thee in the west, fronting the west, communing with thee, O comrade lustrous with silver face in the night, and each to keep, and all, retrievements out of the night, the song, the wondrous chant of the gray-brown bird, and the tallying chant, the echo aroused in my soul, with the lustrous and drooping star, and the countenance full of woe, with the holders holding my hand, nearing the call of the bird, comrades, mine and I in the midst, and their memory ever to keep, for the dead I loved so well, for the sweetest, wisest soul of all my days and lands, and this for his dear sake, lilac, star, and bird twined with the chant of my soul, there in the fragrant pines and the cedars dusk. It is a beautifully modulated poem. It's not always fun to read a poem like that, but it's a good experience to have read it, as the quality of the meaning is very strong. And I think in reading a poem like this, you can feel his intense interior personalness almost throughout. Just the opposite is true of the famous one you all memorized in grade school, which is just a public tribute. It doesn't have any sense of grief at all. It's just a poem that you can put in American Lit anthologies, right? Oh, Captain, my Captain, our fearful trip is done. The ship has weathered every rack. The prize we sought is won. The port is near. The bells I hear. The people all exulting. While follow eyes the steady keel, the vessel grim and daring. But oh, heart, heart, heart. No, we can get along without that.
It's just that old that turns you off.
Not that old. Some O's I can take. There are a couple O's in that one. I want to introduce you to start off today, since we have time, with the great opening of Song of Myself. And I think in half an hour we can go through a few sections and get us on the road. This is the single most monumental work of poetry we have produced in America, certainly in the 19th century. So if you can find that, it's right early on in the poem, in the book. This is Song of Myself. Find it then? This is his masterpiece. It's 55, 52 sections long. It goes on for page after page after page. It's an arduous study, and to make it worse, it's a poem which cannot be really felt or understood with less than about 5 or 6 readings. I can tell you that. But it can be experienced in one reading, and it can be taught, and I can assuredly touch on some of the major qualities of the poem. What this poem is going to do is to help us join him, join the myself, as we see, in an attempt to incorporate in ourselves the entire American experience, all of America and all of life, from birth to death. Whitman is going to argue the sacredness of the human soul, human spirit, and try to convince us that the only way to come to terms with our interior selves, which is our own goodness, which he believes in, is to open ourselves up to all humanity, and especially America, is represented by that. I have had kids, long after I finished doing this, come up and say, I can't stand that Whitman, he is so egocentric. Anybody who'd write a poem called Song of Myself is just too egocentric for me. They don't believe me when I say what you have to do is take this as a literary experience. You must to understand it. Whitman does appear to have a sort of egocentric focus, but that's because he believes that all of us, you too, have value in you that makes an egocentric vision worth having. It's not that you're celebrating something that's evil. You're not scum inside with him. You are good. And every healthy person will celebrate himself as well. Moreover, he's doing this as a pose. It's a literary experience. It's not Walter Whitman that's doing this. It's Walt. And he's creating an image which he says, share with me this and see if you can find the comparable one in your own. The prose equivalent of Song of Myself is Henry David Thoreau's book Walden. Because Thoreau does the same thing there in prose, which is to say, the only person I can talk about is me. You may think I'm talking too much about myself, but I'm the only one who knows myself, and I don't know anybody else. So if you want to read this book, come along with me, and we'll go out and build a cabin in the woods and see what it means to live simply, and to find out what it is to be alive. People feel the same way about Thoreau, and he was an egocentric maniac, in my opinion, but it's nothing to do with the value of Walden, which is the same kind of created fiction that Song of Myself is. The years that Thoreau spent on Walden Pond were rewritten to create a piece of literature which we call Walden, which has very little to do with the fact of the cabin or the weather or the looms or anything else. It's a created artistic experience, first class book. Something else you might consider doing, by the way, in this class sometime. It's really good. It's good. Thoreau was a marvelous prose writer, absolutely enlivening. So think of this in a Walden-like context. I celebrate myself and sing myself, and what I assume you shall assume, for every atom belonging to me as good belongs to you. Okay. You notice a different tone right away from Lilac, don't you? We're back to that confident man, not the man that's covered with grief at this moment. He starts right off by sort of insulting us in some ways, if you're easily insulted that way. I'm going to talk about number one, right? Gary. I'm going to sing about me. The second line is the invitation. And what I assume, you shall assume. He's saying, if you're going to read this poem, for a while, pretend you're me and go along with me. This is a hand-in-hand kind of experience, too, as you can see. As the poem goes on, he's going to say, now, all you have done is gone with me through mine. You have to do it yourself. And doing it yourself doesn't mean you do what I do, but it means you have an analog in this poem to find your own life. For every atom belonging to me, as good belongs to you. What kids forget is that he's saying, you're as good as I am. They tend to want to read, I'm really good. You can come along and enjoy my goodness for a while, but he really is trying to say, you're as good as I am, and you can participate in this, however good I am. So let's look at this Whitman pose. I loaf and invite my soul. I lean and loaf at my ease, observing a spear of summer grass. That's the central image of the poem, and in fact the central image of the book. It's going to appear over and over again, and any time you read the poem and you see him refer to grass, you're in some moment of transition from one section to another to make it work. That grass, is he looking at a field of grass? That's the secret to the universe for him. That's the secret to the universe. That which we see always in mass phenomena. I'm going to go home today. When I get home, I'm going to put on my shorts and I'm going to cut lots of grass leaves. I'm going to dig out the lawnmower and cut grass. But what I'm not going to do is cut spears of grass. I'm going to mow the lawn. And Whitman's goal here is to get us to say, I want to look at that blade of grass, what it means that it is part of this mass, what do you want to call it? This incredible phenomenon that covers the earth, grass. Because if you know that, then you know God. God is in that blade of grass. My tongue, and this is the secret of the individual, obviously, right? You and I are blades of grass in a world where there's millions and millions of them. Every atom of my blood, formed from this soil, this air, born here of parents, born here from parents the same, and their parents the same. I, now 37 years old, in perfect health begin, hoping to cease not till death. I taught for years and years, so I could say that honestly, and now I'm past it. I taught 2 classes where I could say 37 years in perfect health, and now I'm 38. Just can't win. But that stanza is important because what he's doing there is trying to say, well, let's stop and look at me. Right? That is, what created Gary, Walt, right? Whoever you are, Dorothy, Gail, the person that made you, the earth you come from. You come from, I come from, Doris, Vincent, right, who made me. My mother's been dead for 26 years, but she still made me, and I carry her in me. Born here, of parents, born here from parents the same, and their parents the same. The number 37 is important, you see, because he's lying, by the way. He wasn't 37. He picked that number out. He was close to it, but he was about 38, I think, when he did it. But the point is, who am I, right? Who am I? 38 years old, born Eau Claire, Wisconsin, January 5th, 1944, of, right? The detail of the fact of me. That's me. Now I'm going to begin. Because I can't begin any earlier, right? Too late. And I'm going to keep on going until I die. Creeds and schools in abeyance. Retiring back a while, sufficed at what they are, but never forgotten. I harbor for good or bad. I permit to speak at every hazard. Nature without check, with original energy. This is in a sense, the trumpet to the poem, the whole poem. He's saying, all right, now you and I know, we have been taught all our lives what it is to be good, how to be a Christian, right? You listen every Sunday to the priest or the minister. We go to school and all your teachers tell you how to be ethical and how to be democratic and how to do this. And he says, all right, that's all well and good, but let's start over and see if we can do it ourselves. So he says, you know what abeyance means. It means put it aside for now. It doesn't mean you're not going to listen to them again. He says, I don't care what the priest told you last Sunday. We're going to forget about him for a while. Whether he's good or bad is irrelevant to our purpose. I want you to, he says, face nature without check, and that means without holding back or restraint, right? On a one-on-one basis, because you have that power in you. You don't have to listen to the minister or the preacher or the teacher. Here's section 2. I like this. Houses and rooms are full of perfumes. The shelves are crowded with perfumes. I breathe the fragrance myself, and know it, and like it. The distillation would intoxicate me also, but I shall not let it. The atmosphere is not a perfume. It has no taste of the distillation. It is odorless. It is for my mouth forever. I am in love with it. I will go to the bank by the wood and become undisguised and naked. I am mad for it to be in contact with me. Look at the 2 stanzas. Whitman is not going to say that human structures, creations, experiences are bad. He is going to say that you and I, and Thoreau would agree with him here, you and I submit ourselves to the temptation. Right? You walk into a house, he says houses and rooms are full of perfumes. Right? You walk in, I know the smell of this club, don't you? You walk in, it has, like Grandma's house, a certain special odor, like my mom's house, like my own house at home, that says this is a human-created structure. He says, I know this. It's wonderful to walk in here. I always feel good at this place, right? But I shouldn't be here all the time. Right? You can fall in love with that fragrance, that perfume. And he says, no, let's put away all of these. I'm not going to let it intoxicate me, he says. I'm not going to let it. I want to go outside and get one-on-one to nature. Because perfume is a human creation that separates you from the natural odor of the environment. Right? And he knows already how Americans are afraid of natural odors. Right? We deodorize ourselves from top to bottom. So he says the atmosphere, which is not the inside of the house, but outside, he says it doesn't have any taste. It's odorless, but it is for my mouth forever, he said. I want this inside, I want to taste it. He's a very tactile man. I'm in love with it. And when I feel this, what do I want to do? Well, what nobody in the 19th century would think of doing, he says. I'm going to go down, and I'm going to take off my clothes, and I'm going to lay on the bank, right, of Green Lake until they arrest me. Right? Oh, I would like to do that. It's a crime for me to teach Whitman in a tie. Right? At school, when I teach Whitman in the U, I used to always put on Yeah, I have an Indian shirt, sort of a dashiki kind, that opens down, it's embroidered, and I always put on something real light and shorts, and I come in and say, all right, it's Whitman time. But I didn't dare do it here, so that shows what a coward I am. I am mad for it to be in contact with me. This is all right, let's see what I've got. The smoke of my own breath. That's what I want to have. Echoes, ripples, buzzed whispers, love root, silk thread, crotch and vine. My respiration and inspiration, the beating of my heart, the passing of blood and air through my lungs, the sniff of green leaves and dry leaves and of the shore and dark-colored sea rocks and of hay in the barn, the sound of the belched words of my voice loosed to the eddies of the wind, a few light kisses, a few embraces, a reaching around the arms, the play, shine and shade on the trees as the supple boughs wag, the delight alone, or in the rush of the streets, or along the fields and hillsides, the feeling of health, the full moon trill, the song of me rising from bed and meeting the sun. Oh, I love that line. I think that's so beautiful. That's Thoreau, remember? Morning is when I am awake and there is a dawn in me, Thoreau says. It's interior. It's getting it, making it work. He starts off by saying, I want to feel the physical life in my body. Right? That's what it is. I want to feel my muscles. And he's not afraid of insulting you. When he says that all these things in my body, the echoing, the sounds of my chest, the ripples of my muscles, a love root is his penis. I mean, he's talking about the physical maleness of being alive and feel that air going in and out of your chest, right? This is what it is to be alive. And then taking in the world, smell the leaves. Right? I think it's a crime that they have forbidden us to burn leaves in fall, because that always meant fall to me when I smelled those leaves burning. And here you don't even know you're going through fall. You don't even, it doesn't really snow for that matter. But for me, that's one of those bringing in of the changing seasons of nature that you feel. Whitman would feel the same way. And he uses words. He's not afraid to shock you. I mean, what 19th century poet would say? The sound of the belched words of my voice. Belch is a poetic word? No, of course not. Longfellow would turn over in his grave if he were dead. But he had 30 years to live. So. But that belch is a belch of the natural, right? It's eructation. Is that the term? The formal term? It's the naturalness of, you get out there, you can see him put it out there. I love what he says. And then he gets sensitive. Whitman can do anything in about 5 lines. Whitman is one of the finest poets to get that wonderful sense of loving friendship. This is not sexual, but it is wonderfully warm, isn't it? A few light kisses, a few embraces, a reaching around the arms. That's pure, I think. And then the feeling of health, the full moon trill, the song of me rising from bed and meeting the sun. I have a weakness because when I come across a line like that, I like to read it over again and find another excuse to read it so I can hear the words. And he speaks right out to us. Have you reckoned 1,000 acres much? Have you reckoned the earth much? Have you practiced so long to learn to read? Have you felt so proud to get at the meeting of poems? Right? All of us, you think you've done all these great things. He says, right? Stop this day and night with me, and you shall possess the origin of all things. You shall possess the good of the earth and sun. You shall no longer take things at second or third hand, nor look through the eyes of the dead, nor feed on the specters and books. You shall not look through my eyes either, nor take things from me. You shall listen to all sides and filter them from yourself. And that's what people forget when they read Whitman all the time, that ultimately he's going to ask you not to take it from him. But you have to, but he's saying, I can show you how I did it. You must do it on a one-on-one relationship. This is very Emersonian, by the way, as well. Now let's look at what happens here. I've heard what the talkers were talking. The talk of the beginning and the end. I do not talk of the beginning or the end. There never was any more inception than there is now, nor any more youth or age than there is now, and will never be any more perfection than there is now, nor any more heaven or hell than there is now. urge and urge and urge, always the procreant urge of the world. Emerson is very strong on energy, on power, the sense of the world creating itself. One of our religion teachers told me at lunch yesterday that she was, in fact, it was Jeff Sarkis was saying that he was teaching, they were doing a sexual body unit, talking about the makeup of the body and all this, and he noticed two girls were blushing and blushing and blushing and giggling, and he said usually it didn't bother him, but finally he said, well, girls, what's going on? And she said, look out the window, and right outside the window of the tree were two sparrows meeting. And the biggest boy in the class, who's one of the football players, he must be 250 pounds, said, I always wondered how birds did it. And he was aware of the contrast. Here you are reading out of a book, right? What nature is doing in its naturalness, that urge of creation and life and vitality that's all around us right now, in the trees, the animals as well. Out of the dimness opposite equals advance. Always substance and increase, always sex, always a knit of identity. That means the knit of identity is the creation of you, right? What knits you together and makes you the person you are, the oneness of you. Always distinction, always a breed of life. To elaborate is no avail. Learned and unlearned feel that it is so. Sure as the most certain sure, plumb in the uprights. Well entreated, braced in the beams, stout as a horse, affectionate, haughty, electrical, I am this mystery. Here we stand. Now those words are words of importance in him. Affectionate, haughty, electrical. It's great to be me. There's that ego fellow. It's great to be alive, to feel this in me that I'm alive. Clear and sweet is my soul, and clear and sweet is all that is not my soul. My body too. So lack one, lacks both. When the unseen is proved by the seen, till that becomes unseen and receives proof of its turn. Now if you look at that for a second, you'll see what he's doing is setting up a sequence of ideas here to make us, how do you prove, how do you believe in the unseen? See, that is what doesn't exist. God, the spirit of life, is proved by the people you see around you. And when they go on, their proof is in the seen. We all participate in both levels. On the one hand, the unseen, on the other, the seen. If you look at it right. Showing the best and dividing it from the worst age vexes age. Knowing the perfect fitness and equanimity of things while they discuss. I am silent and go bathe and admire myself. Right? That is, we spend age after age as people going to classes and being told, well, this is good and this is bad and this is old and this is young and this is that astronomer, right? The lecture of the astronomer with all the proofs, he said, blah, 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 20 billion miles and light years away. And what Whitman says, yeah, go out and I go home and I draw a nice warm bath and I lay back and I look and say, what a creation of God I am. I am so wonderful. Welcome is every organ and attribute of me, and of any man hearty and clean. Not an inch nor a particle of an inch is vile, and none shall be less familiar than the rest. I am satisfied. I see, dance, laugh, and sing, as the hugging and loving bedfellow sleeps at my side through the night, withdraws at the peep of the day with stealthy tread, leaving me baskets covered with towels, swelling the house with their plenty. Shall I postpone my acceptation and realization and screen at my eyes that they turn from gazing after and down the road and forthwith cipher and show me to a cent exactly the value of one and exactly the value of two and which is ahead? That's a hard one, but it's a beautiful stanza and very, very powerful when you look at it. Very modern in its image. He wakes up. Go back for a second. As the hugging and loving bedfellow sleeps at my side. The person you are close to gets up in the morning and leaves. And we don't know, it's male and female, male and male. It sounds male from his language, but it doesn't have to be. It's just the point is this is the one you love. He gets up. And he withdraws at the peep of day with stealthy tread. Why? Sure, quiet, taking. That's a care or concern for the person you care for. But what does he do? Look at this odd line. Leaving me baskets covered with white towels, swelling the house with their plenty. In the first version of the poem, he had with white towels bulging the house. It doesn't work. He changed it to swelling as time passed. What image you get?
He took a shower and threw the towel.
No. Oh, he threw him in the basket. Yeah.
A bunch of croissants.
What? Croissants?
I can eat roast.
All right. Okay. You're absolutely right. Kids always have fun with this because most of them don't understand at all what it means, baskets. But it's not baskets of white towels. It's baskets covered with white towels. So it's something in the basket, and I am certain that
It's croissant.
no. I think it's. What do you think I think it is? No. She's on the right track. But it can't be croissants because croissants are done already. But the word swelling, rising dough. Yeah, sure. That's what rise is, isn't it? Yeah. Now, all of us who remember Mom, right, and my mother would put them in a basket and she'd put a white towel over it. It's a very clear image, I think. And the point is rising, the growing, the gift of it, right? Yes, it's a marvelous personal gift. And it swells the house. You see why bulge is not as good as swell? Yeah. It swells the house with their plenty. And then he says to himself, shall I postpone my acceptation and realization? That is, do I say, hey, I'm not going to take this yet. I've got to figure out something first, okay? And scream at my eyes that they turn from gazing after and down the road. What do you do when one you love walks off? Your eyes, that is the natural response, is to watch him go, right? The eyes want to linger on that body, on that person, and say, that is the one I love. Right? But what are we taught to do? Hey, wait a minute. Don't find yourself in an inferior position, because if they got one up on you, who knows, right? You've got to get one up on them. The message of daily, disgusting life is that when you've had a close relationship with somebody, you make sure you keep the accounts balanced. And he says, this is what I'm supposed to do, that I tell my eyes, don't linger and gaze and take what's been given to you, but come right back here, right? And forthwith, cipher and show me to a cent. Cipher means to add up, it's the old term, right? Exactly the value of one and exactly the value of two and which is ahead. I think he knows that no relationship that's based upon am I ahead or is he ahead, right, is going to last very long. Now see, if I take this basket of bread, that means that I owe him a bottle of wine, right? And I better get a bottle of wine now, or otherwise, right? No. He says, you cannot run a life in which you say to yourself, it's going to be a continual analytical adding and subtracting. You've got to gaze and linger and take it. That openness to experience. Oh, all these people come up to him. I'll just do 4 and 5, and then it'll bring us to a good stopping place. Trippers and askers surround me. People I meet. The effect upon me of my early life, of the ward and city I live in, or the nation. The latest dates, discoveries, inventions, societies, authors old and new. My dinner, dress, associates, looks, compliments, dues. The real or fancied indifference of some man or woman I love. The sickness of one of my folks or of myself, or ill-doing, or loss, or lack of money, or depressions, or exaltations, battles, the horrors of fratricidal war, the fever of doubtful news, the fitful events. These come to me, days and nights, and go from me again. They're not means. Depending on the time of year, I'm always responsive to trippers and askers surround me. For me, this is representative of that time of the day or the year when people bug you and bug you and bug you. All these, who are you? Where did you come from? Where did you go to school? How old is your wife? How old are your kids? Were you born? He says, did you read the paper this morning? Did you find out, right? Where do you live in Greenland? You know, that sense of all of a sudden you get people who just on you all the time, and you want to say, cool it, you know. Now, I'm interested in these things. He says all of these things. These come to me days and nights. But all of these things come and go, don't they? And what he's saying is what we must do is remember to keep, this is very, this when I was going through troubles at the U in latter years, I tried to think about this a lot. I have to keep something inside from the pulling and hauling, and say, hey, inside is something that is not touched by all these details. They are not me, myself.
Good thing that Nancy was saying, in our age, we get so irritated. Go to a party, and what do you do? Especially among women,
Yes.
you know, like, what do
Yeah.
you do? And I
Sure.
say, well, I clean the bathroom. It's very
Yeah.
interesting.
Yeah.
It doesn't tell you anything about the person.
That's
You have
right.
the most fabulous job as being
But people will determine their response to you on those. That is, what they want to do is define you on by what
and
you are.
You can't do that in 5 minutes.
No.
And it's silly.
And you can see it in that language, tripper. I love trippers because a trip. It always reminds me of the Beatles song. She was a day tripper, remember? A one-way ticket gal, right? And most of us are trippers as well. And I know I love to know details about people, but there are times when you have to say, none of this is me. I mean, the real me has to be cool inside. And times when all the, in high school, you know, one of the qualities of high school kids that drives you crazy, they never wait for anybody to finish, right? If someone's talking to you at the desk, someone else will come up and Mr. Culbert, just a minute, and then somebody else, 15 at one time. Mr. Culbert, Mr. Culbert. Nobody will ever wait for anything. It drives me crazy. And I try to think, none of this is touching me. None of this. And here's these marvelous next lines. Apart from the pulling and hauling, stands what I am. Stands amused, complacent, compassionating, idle, unitary, looks down, is erect, or bends an arm on an impalpable certain rest, looking with side-curved head, curious what will come next, both in and out of the game and watching it, and wondering at it. Backward I see in my own days, where I sweated through fog with linguists and contenders. I have no mockings or arguments. I witness. Wait. I don't know, it's awful hard to maintain that, but the point is still, I think, very important. Apart from the pulling and hauling, and what I am. You could just acquire that and hang on to it. Amused. Complacent. Keep a sense of humor about it, right? Keep cool. Compassionating. Idle. Unitary. I like that a lot. I think he must have invented the phrase pulling and hauling, because I've heard it frequently. One kid wants you this way, another one wants you that way, and principal's after you for this and that. It's a nice line. And now we're up to the first climactic moment. This book, this poem is, in a sense, an inverted mystical experience, if I can use language somewhat like that. He is going to enter a strange world through the use of nature and the body, which is just the opposite of what mystics and religion do with thinking about God by avoiding the body. So I call it inverted. Does that make sense what I'm saying? That is, mystics traditionally reach God in a special way by cutting themselves loose from the limitations and demands of the body. But what Whitman is going to do is to reach God through that. And the first of these is to come to terms with himself. It's a very famous passage, section 5. It's him and his soul. I mind how once we lay such a transparent summer morning. Did I skip? Oh, I'm sorry, you're right. I believe in you, my soul. The other I am must not abase itself to you. The other I am is his body, right? The two parts of the human. And you must not be abased to the other. Loaf with me on the grass. Loose the stomp from your throat. Not words. Not music or rhyme I want, not custom or lecture, not even the best, only the lull I like, the hum of your velvet voice. Open himself up to that interior feeling, and now we have this strange emotional experience that we've had, very erotic in quality. I mind how once we lay such a transparent summer morning, how you settled your head athwart my hips and gently turned over upon me, and parted the shirt from my bosom bone, and plunged your tongue to my bare stripped heart, and reached till you felt my beard, and reached till you held my feet, swiftly arose and spread around me the peace and knowledge that pass all the argument of the earth. And I know that the hand of God is the promise of my own. And I know that the Spirit of God is the brother of my own. And that all the men ever born are also my brothers, and the women my sisters and lovers. And a counsel in creation is love. And limitless are leaves, stiff or drooping in the fields, and brown ants in the little wells beneath them, and mossy scabs of the worm fence, tombstone, elder, elm, poetry. It is a stunning piece of poetry. The main image is very, very erotic and strange, as you can see. It's he and his own soul having a deeply sexual, but much more serious than that term is usually taken, experience out on the grass. He imagines his soul putting its head, as you can see, you settle your head athwart my hips and gently turned over. So the images are sort of like a cross. And what the soul does is tear open his shirt and reach till you felt my beard. Reach up and reach down. Yeah. I always tell my kids when I read it, it reminds me of when I hold Emmy, my daughter. Right? And she's only 5, so I can take her in my lap. And I can hold her whole body. And that, you can't do it with adults. You try, there's always a leg or an arm or something sticking out. But with a small child, you can get that sense of, oh, I love you so much. I just want to own you. Right? I want to take you inside. And, right. That's what I say. To eat you up. And he's working on that from the experience of the receiver as well as the doer. And so this image of the soul reaching down, and even though it's a sexual image, as you can see, it's down to the heart. It's not a genital feeling at all. He spreads open the shirt and he plunges his tongue down into the very heart. And it's where our soul is, our heart, our emotions, our feelings. And when he gets that sense of union, that is the union between the self in its soul and the self in its body, he comes to understand what God means, what nature means. It's the beginning of the trip that he's going to take to incorporate all of this world around us. And once that happens, right, arose and spread around with a peace and knowledge that passed all the argument of the earth. This is a religious experience, in other words. And I know that the hand of God is the promise of my own. And the Spirit of God is the brother of my own. All the men ever born are also my brothers, and the women my sisters and lovers. And in that crucial line, Kelson, creation, is love. The Kelson is the part that the keel is attached to on a boat. It's the backbone behind it. That everything in creation is attached to that crucial quality. Love is it. Well, you say, is he a Christian or is he not? Well, obviously he is a Christian. If you don't believe this, you're not a Christian, right? God is love in some ways, and he manifests himself that way. But to know it intellectually is not the same thing as to feel it. And what he's saying is that this is how I came to understand that underneath all of this is love. And you'll think when you read the poem that the stanza should stop there, right? It's so climactic a moment that the very keel of creation, the Kelson of creation is love. But he keeps on for 3 lines to show you what that means. It isn't just me and my body, right? No, it is. And limitless are leaves. Yeah. And that is love. And brown ants and little wells in every one of them. And for love. God negroes. And mossy scabs and worm things. Deep stone, elder, long, poultry. All these worthless things, right? Oh, you get rid of them. They ruin your garden. No. And then stanza, section 6, which will be